is the greatest racing car driver in the world? I grew up with legendary names like Graham Hill, Sterling Moss, Jackie Stewart, Alain Prost. I love watching Formula One races. My wife and I used to watch it very regularly, but I don't know why. I must confess it's rather a crazy addiction because they're like astronauts in their spacesuits and helmets. You can't recognize the drivers. They're all going zooming past. You don't know what's going on. There's a huge amount of noise which is taking place. And the only thing that keeps you riveted is now and again there's some spectacular crash. And remember, crash or no crash, actually, these are very, very safe races. These cars today are extremely safe. I know in those days, the commentary used to turn us on. Oh wow, the commentary was full of energy. It used to take you into the behind the scenes, into the thoughts of the drivers. And I think that's really what attracted us. So even how to judge which is the best kind of a race is no longer only about who was the fastest. Because the fastest is not necessarily the best. It's also the best is somebody who knows how to manage a situation consistently. Do you know that the fastest speed recorded for a racing driver in 1950 at Silverstone by Giuseppe Farina was 150 kilometers an hour? And you know, recently, what was the fastest speed recorded by a Formula One driver, Kimi Raikkonen? 262 kilometers an hour. A difference of more than 100 kilometers an hour in the speed 50 years ago and in the speed today. But we must remember that in the 50s, safety was non-existent. And if you had a crash, it was often going to be fatal. Naturally, one had to drive much slower and much more carefully. The driving skills were much greater in the 50s than they are today, even though cars are much, much faster. In those days, it was all about the man. In these days, it's all about the machine. And today, according to me, there are, and I'm not a specialist, but according to me, there are 4 drivers, I would say, who compete for the title of the greatest racing driver of the world. Ayaton Cena was a flamboyant Brazilian racing car driver. He won 3 Formula One championships, 1988, 1990, 1991, 3 of them in 4 years. And he is famously quoted as saying, being second is the first one to lose. Another one he said was, if there is a gap and you don't take that gap, you can't call yourself a racing car driver. It was actually taking such a gap, an almost impossible gap, that his life was prematurely cut short. In a horrific car accident, he died there and then in the car itself. Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton. In recent times, Lewis Hamilton has equaled Michael Schumacher's record of 7 Formula One wins, which is an all-time record. Nobody has reached 7 Formula One wins. The next to it is 5 Formula One wins. Now both are equal, but again, compare it. Michael Schumacher had 7 Formula One wins in a shorter time span career, and he's been out of racing now after his skiing accident for the last 7 years or so. Lewis Hamilton is still racing. In the days when Michael Schumacher was racing, there were around 16 races a year. Today there are about 19 races a year. So how do you compare? Because if you have more wins, it still means you have far more opportunities than you had earlier. Even though Ayaton Cena was a star, I cannot call him the greatest Formula One championship driver in the world, because I think he took unacceptable risks. Now let's look at Juan Manuel Fangio. What a lovely name. I love the way it rolls off the tongue. Juan Manuel Fangio, the great Argentinian racing driver of the 1950s. He won in 4 different cars: Mercedes, Ferrari, Maserati, and Alfa Romeo. This has never happened before and never since.
Mr. Cena, which of your fellow competitors do you admire most?
One of the greatest drivers of all times is Fangio.
Fangio is the world champion!
Lewis Hamilton called Fangio the godfather of Formula One.
He was the greatest driver of all time.
Schumacher won with Ferrari, but not with Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton has only won with Mercedes. Juan Manuel Fangio raced with any car, and he won a Formula World Championship with each car. You can see this in A Life of Speed on Netflix. Extraordinary times. So my case is, even though Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton have won 7 races each, in my book, Juan Manuel Fangio is the greatest racing driver of all times. You can see some very, very interesting stories about the people and the drivers who constituted the mystique and the legend of Formula One racing. And you can see Drive to Survive, which tells you all about the behind the scenes of Formula One racing. It's also on Netflix, and of course, A Life of Speed. So it's just a matter of speed. Click that subscriber button, Sid Kark Speaks on YouTube fast, and you will be the first to receive the next notification for another exciting review. See you next week.